It's not a rumor. It's not a theory. It's not a simple suggestion. It's a snapshot. Or rather, it's a snapshot that, according to some sources, is accompanied by documents, internal confirmations, and references to official publications. And that's precisely where the question arises. And this is where we must start. Because what is emerging is not a minor detail, not a polemic between factions, but something that touches the very heart of the Catholic faith. The photograph dates back to 1995. It doesn't portray just any layperson, nor does it portray an outside observer. It features an Augustinian priest, Robert Prevost, the man the world knows today as Pope Leo XIV. And there he is, on his knees, among other participants, not standing, not distant, not critical, kneeling, like the others, during a ritual dedicated to Pachamama, the so-called Mother Earth. And here, the first major excuse immediately falls apart. For years, after the Vatican Gardens incident of 2019, it was said, the Pope didn't know, the Pope was observing, the Pope was there for dialogue. Not here. Here, the scene is different. Here, there's no distance. Here, there's participation. And that's what makes everything infinitely more serious. Because this isn't an isolated photo. The material that emerges speaks to a specific context, an Augustinian symposium, published proceedings, a book printed in 1996. Clear captions, unambiguous, uninterpretable. Celebration of the Pachamama rite, an agricultural rite offered by the Andean cultures of Peru and Bolivia. Not generic symbolism, not harmless folklore, a rite called by name. And within that scene, identified by several sources within the Augustinian order itself, he appears, Prevost, recognized by priests who knew him, compared with photographs from the same period, also present in other images of the same event. The incomplete descriptions point to the Pope. And so the question becomes inevitable. What was he kneeling before? Because in the Catholic tradition, kneeling is not just any gesture. It is adoration. It is recognition of a higher presence. It is the gesture performed before the Eucharist, before Christ truly present. And today, in many churches, that gesture is discouraged, ridiculed, sometimes even hindered. Yet in that photograph, the same gesture appears to be directed toward a pagan rite. This isn't a detail, it's a fracture. And the picture becomes even more disturbing when we discover what happens next. Because according to the documentation, in the same place, in the same space, used for the Pachamama rite, Mass is also celebrated. The same participants, the same context. First, the worship of the earth, then the Eucharistic sacrifice. Anyone familiar with the Catholic faith immediately understands the weight of this transition. It's not just a symbolic overlay, it's a confusion that touches the very essence of worship. And at this point, words enter the picture, not from commentators, not from bloggers, but from cardinals and bishops of the Church. When the Pachamama scandal broke in 2019, the reactions were harsh. Gerhard Müller spoke of a crime against divine law. Raymond Burke clearly stated that something very serious had happened in St. Peter's Basilica. Carlo Maria Vigano spoke of a new form of apostasy. Athanasius Schneider unequivocally condemned the veneration of a pagan symbol, and Bishop José Luis Azcona stated it unequivocally: Pachamama is not and never will be the Virgin Mary. Those words weren't outbursts. They were theological judgments. They were precise condemnations. And today, they return with even greater force. Because if what was condemned in 2019 was already serious, Here we are faced with something even more direct. Not tolerance, not passive presence. If it's all true, we are faced with personal participation. And then, according to this reconstruction, an even deeper line would emerge. No longer an isolated episode, no longer a simple oversight, but the possible reflection of a specific education, of a well-defined cultural context, of a theological vision developed over time. That Latin American theology that mixed Christianity, Marxism, environmentalism, and indigenous symbolism to produce what is now called eco-theology. A vision in which creation takes the place of the creator, in which the earth becomes an object of veneration, in which Christian language is emptied and filled with foreign content. And whoever grew up in this environment, whoever was educated there, inevitably carries that vision with them. But we're not talking about theories here. We're talking about a gesture that, if confirmed, is concrete, public, documented. And in Catholic theology, public gestures carry enormous weight. Because faith isn't just internal, it's also external. It manifests itself, it's visible, and when a public gesture contradicts faith, the problem can't be ignored. For this reason, in the Church's tradition, there is a clear principle. Public sin requires a public response, not to humiliate, not to condemn the person, but to re-establish the truth, to avoid scandal, to protect the faithful. And this is where the silence becomes deafening. Because if all this is false, it must be debunked. If it's true, it must be clarified. We can't stay in the middle. We can't let an issue of this magnitude be absorbed, forgotten, diluted. And at this point, a comparison that weighs like a millstone comes into play. That of the martyrs. Men, women, and children who in the early centuries preferred death rather than offer even a grain of incense to a false god. Not grand, spectacular gestures, a minimal gesture, yet decisive, because they knew that even a small outward act could be a denial of faith. And today, what do we see today? We see priests, bishops, and high-level figures participating in ambiguous rites, bordering on syncretism which confuse the faithful. We see a church that seems to have lost its sense of boundaries. It no longer clearly distinguishes between adoration and dialogue, between respect and compromise, between openness and surrender. So the real question is no longer the photograph. The photograph is only the beginning. The real question is much deeper. What does this image reveal? What does it say about what has happened in recent decades within the Church? What does it say about the direction it has taken? Because if this episode were true and isolated, it would already be serious. But if it were instead the sign of something bigger, then the problem takes on a whole new dimension. And at that point, we can no longer pretend nothing is happening. We can no longer hide behind labels. We can't dismiss everything as an attack, an exaggeration, or a polemic, because this isn't about choosing sides. It's about facing reality. And reality, when it emerges, always demands an answer. There's only one question, and it weighs more than all the rest. If this is true, how deep is the crisis? What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.